All right, Wellington. So, this game makes some very odd choices. First of all, trying to put a CDG on, it's not really an operational situation because 3 years of the whole Peninsular campaign is strategic in nature, but it's not the kind of strategic situation that most of the CDGs try to handle. Most of them try to handle a whole war view, right? So yes, you can look at the Peninsular campaign as a war of its own between France and Spain and England, but it's set in a world view. You know, I mean, there's other battles going on, and there's a general coalition against Napoleon. So you're getting a slice of the whole picture, nothing more than that, even if it's at a strategic level. So I consider it almost an operational game. And as such, the small area, it means that, and you could say the same about Wilderness War. Wilderness War is the same kind of flavor, although it goes on longer, in terms of being more of an operational style game. The level of detail required to give a game operational chops is pretty heavy, right? Certainly you can play a game that doesn't have that level of detail on an operational situation, but it's the odd man out. I feel Wilderness War did a good job of capturing the level of detail appropriate for what's going on in the North American theater for the 7 Years' War. This one, so one of the reasons Wilderness War works is because there's certain channels of movement in North America at that point. So you really didn't need to represent much of the territory. Spain's a different situation here, where really the whole board, is filled with interconnections, etc. And so you have the full bubble map lifestyle of the CDG, where, things are pretty much connected to everything near them. And that ends up requiring more and more detailed rules about interception and this, that, and the other. Evasion. These are all present in Wilderness War. But because the movement's less channeled here, they seem to cause more trouble. There's more room for them to kind of conflict with one another. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the rules as they are. They seem to actually work, but they become a bigger burden in an operational game. And I've found, for me at least, that with CDGs, if they're going to be of a semi-military nature, and this is of an entirely military nature, I'm happiest if they're at a very, very high level of abstraction. So, Sword of Rome does it. Napoleonic Wars probably is kind of teetering on the edge, but it kind of does it. things like 30 Years War with their kind of random. You didn't have a lot of maneuver that was controllable by the players. I mean, you maneuver around, but it's sort of like you're wandering around through the territory looking for good places to be, as opposed to, trying to develop a strategy for conquering and holding the area. So that's one side that I think is kind of weird, but certainly there are examples out there of CDGs that handle this. The much weirder one is to make it a 4-player game. It's essentially a 2-sided war, and what you've got is pairs that are working together. And both this and its sister game, Kuduzov, do that. And that's a kind of odd situation, but from what I saw of it, the thinking that the players go through isn't that horrible. You're playing for your side to win, but you may want to delay when your side wins if you're not doing too well. I think you do have to take it into account that your side losing is at least somewhat worse than coming in on the winning side in the second position. I think you have to have that mindset to some extent. But I don't think you have to, I don't think you want to be in the position where you're saying, oh, geez, if I don't win, I lose, That is not the correct mindset for playing this, because what you're going to do then is I think you're going to actively try to hinder your ally in ways that maybe you shouldn't. And that wouldn't play out historically. Oh, I don't know. So, I was exceedingly disappointed, but I feel like most of that has to do with how I've kind of grown into feeling about CDGs. They are not as exciting as they were when I played my first few. And this is not one to rekindle that excitement. Amateurs to Arms, which was the last one I played, kind of did that. It kind of brought me back into, wow, you can do something that's really enjoyable with a CDG. And maybe if I broke out something like Here I Stand, it would work. What's nice about games like Here I Stand is the scope is just so much bigger, and Sword of Rome gets in there too, where you don't mind the level of abstraction that the bubble map implies. And if you get rid of that level of abstraction, which this game tries to do, and which Wilderness War does more successfully, you end up with a heavier burden of rules in terms of, the maneuvering, in terms of the interception rules and stuff like that. That's just really more than I want to deal with. All right, let's talk a little bit about components, and then we'll talk about gameplay in a bit. First of all, you have the damn bubble map, and I've grown to really despise the way these look, the way they operate, what they mean in the game. It's essentially an area map that looks less attractive, right? That's what it comes down to. And the only advantage to it over an irregular area map is that you can put these movement connections explicitly on the map, and it becomes more about the movement connections than about the areas. So it's not like you don't have to express the movement connection just through the border, which works fine in a fantasy game, but if you have an actual map, you may have trouble fitting the area that you want to represent onto the map with the borders you want to represent in the right way. counters are fine. I feel these things are a little goofy, and we had some problems because there's little markers that you have to put on top of them, and you can't, to indicate that they can't move or operate anymore. The cards are good quality, shuffleable, yet sturdy, kind of in that nice level, not in the deluxe GMT. I'm going to make pieces of almost hard plastic that will slice up your hands. These little plates to hold the different commanders, and they give you the deployments for the two scenarios that there are. This sucker gives you, I don't know, a way to mark down who controls what. The casualty display, same thing as in Napoleonic Wars. It's a way that it's a calculator, really. And then some stuff that's reproduced on the map, which is not all the charts you need, but most of the ones that are at all complex. And then you have a little map to go talk to people with. The playbook gives setup maps, which is very useful because the actual setup as expressed on the cards can be kind of confusing. And looking at these tells you what the designer intended with it. You have a breakdown of the difference of the two games. Significant lengthy playthrough of, I think, one impulse or something. I don't know. I don't look at those if I don't have to. They're not interesting to me. But then we have players' notes and designers' notes, and those are very helpful because, like I said, the decisions in this game, some of them are really strange. And some of them apply to the actual gameplay rather than just, the representation. Some strategy information, some historical information mixed in with that. A compendium of all the cards, which looks like it really just spells them out. Maybe if you have questions, this will be helpful. No historical background at all on them. I know Board Game Blogger likes to talk about, when he's looking at a CDG, what the historical value, information contained on the cards, or at least in the playbook, is going to be. There's nothing here. Okay, I gotta switch batteries, which is a shame, but that means we got a two-parter here. All right, let's see what we got. Oh, yeah. So that's the components. Hey, the box isn't as armored as they've become recently. Let's look at the rules. Talk a little bit about what's worth talking about in them, I guess. I don't know. So the rule book itself, looking at components, I'm, looking at this after looking at, say, the OSG Avalon Hill rule books, and what else have I played recently? Well, I looked at this in GBOH, and you know what? I've said it before, but GMT rules kind of suck. They tend to nail things down and get not a lot of errata in the rules, but the format of them just consistently is a failure for me. And that does not add to my pleasure of facing their games. And I'm not sure what it is. Some of it has to do with, just too much text that's undifferentiated. It's not as bad as GDW in that sense, but that's what I like to kind of compare it to. But in terms of how well I retain my picture of the rulebook so that I can find things in it, I think these actually do a worse job than the GDW ones do. And I can't justify that at all. You put some images and some charts and stuff. That should help me to discover stuff. But I gotta tell you, things aren't where I expect them to be. And I'm just constantly skimming over the same rule again and again. And even when I know that they're there, and I can't see it because there's just too much text in a set. And I don't know why that happens. It may just be something wrong with my brain. But I find their rules far worse than they should be for either, well, as references in general. I can't keep this damn thing lit. Yeah, I'm really fucking cranky. And it's not just the game. As to the play of the game, the sequence of play doesn't exist anywhere except on the back. There's a how to play the game, which kind of covers that, I guess, sort of. And then the rules are kind of thrown in a jumble in randomness. But the basic is, you've got, like in most CDGs, each player has a hand of cards. They play out their actions with the cards. There's a lot of funkiness going on in here, though. And there is in Napoleonic Wars, too. In terms of... Let's see if we can keep this fucker lit. In terms of... hey, you have an opportunity to trump in if you have more cards than the other guy. You have these little resources you can spend instead of playing a card and get a new card. And then maybe you can play more than one card. All that stuff, I don't remember it really irritating me so much in Napoleonic Wars. I was kind of new to the CDG world at that point. But it feels like all this kvetchy stuff tacked onto the CDG system. And I don't know. I guess the real sharks love it for this kind of game. The Napoleonic War sharks or whatever. They at least seem really excited. Oh, yeah, I'm going to do that. Yeah. But to me, it just seems like all this crap that's just really... Let's make this CDG system a little different from all the others so that it's even harder to learn, I don't feel like there's anything in the mechanisms of this particular flavor and branch that apply to the Napoleonic Wars. I don't think there's anything about this, you have a plus card in this, and you have these resources that's particularly special about that. It could be applied to any era. As opposed to some of the movement rules, which... that complexity is because you're using a bubble map. Okay. So anyway, that is most of the game, is the impulses, as with any CDG. And the complexity there is with all the rules that try to make a bubble map work. Although they did add to the complexity of the card play itself in the game. And that may be interesting to people who like to fuck around with the cards a lot. But then you go to all this stuff that happens at the kind of after the impulses. And some of it's pretty cool. So if you're sitting in an uncontrolled area, you have to suffer from attrition. So that you have to go through the effort of flagging areas during your turn, or else you're going to pay a price. I remember there being a free flagging in Napoleonic Wars, which doesn't seem to be here. That came about if you did take that attrition roll, you got it automatically. Then there's also, if the French are leaving territories in Spain open, i.e. ungarrisoned, there's a chance they might flag over to the other side automatically. Now that's a component issue here, so And you can work around this, but it pissed me off reminding me of that. So the territories are marked in a couple of different ways. One, they have the home country. So all the yellow areas are Spain's home country. But then they have the who's the default owner. Now, if it's yellow with nothing in it, Spain's the default owner. And that's the truth with all the other countries. If it's green and there's nothing in it, southern France is the default owner. Yeah. But if it's yellow and it has a little blue dot or a green triangle, well, then the default owner, assuming you don't have any counter in there, is one of the two French players who in 1812 happened to be occupying that territory. This makes it really hard to see what's going on. Now, the easy expedient is to just use flags there for the French. And in fact, what I would suggest is flag all the areas that aren't Spanish, but then you don't ever need Spanish flags for anything. But yeah, that's not how the game suggests you do it, and that's not how the components really are supported, although there may be enough flags for anything. But it's really annoying to see yellow areas with nothing. You have a piece in it, maybe it's covering that dot or triangle. It looks like it's Spanish home territory. Oh no, it's actually controlled by the Northern French. And that is just problematic. Okay. You have a penalty if you hold on to resources. If you have too many at the end of the turn, you're going to have to throw the rest away. And there are cards, there's a card in the deck that makes you throw away resources over an even lower I can't even think of words anymore. I could say barrier or bar, and that's not the word I'm looking for, and I don't even know what it is. I'm tired, I'm hungry, and I'm cranky as hell. Okay, now we come to the weird stuff, which is the end of the game stuff. So, there's some interesting rules where if France controls Madrid, they have a chance to end the game based on the number of Spanish keys they have. And that's essentially England giving up and or Spain accepting some sort of settlement. And that works pretty nicely. Except for it puts the burden of grabbing Madrid as a big deal on the Brits and the Spaniards. If they can't take Madrid, they're at risk of, maybe up to like a 50-50 chance that the game's going to end on that first year. Now, the way the game is structured, the first year and maybe the second year, if the game ends there, France will probably win. Well, but at least this is something the players can kind of control. I don't think Wellington took Madrid in the first year. I could be wrong here. So if you try to play historically, you're really gambling. Okay? You're really kind of playing with fire and asking to lose the game on that first year. So you have to play better than Wellington did and take more risks and get cut off and stuff like that. But then you come to the peace roll, which is really an automatic on 1812 and 1813. You roll a die, there's a 1 in 6 chance of the game ending. And like I said, the French have a significant advantage in 1812 in the sense that I don't think the Allies can win. Okay? So, what might make sense is to just roll the peace die for the first year and then declare the game over in the French favor if it comes up before you play any of this shit. Except that your decisions, well, No. Your victory choices would change. So, like, the French might not have quite as much competition between each other if they didn't think there was chance that the game could end on the first die roll, or on the first year's die roll. And this is the cheapest and perhaps worst little rule in the game. The designer goes out of his way to explain why it's a reasonable rule, but the real question is, from a game design perspective, why did you put it in? Because from a historical perspective, you can make an argument that that rule makes sense, that there's some possibility that Napoleon could die in Russia and you come to a, it's time to score the victory points in Spain because France just fell, or something like that. That doesn't make a lot of sense anyway, but whatever. You can make an argument that the game would end under the circumstances that the designer does make that argument. But what's much, much harder to do is to make an argument from a gameplay perspective that this is a good thing. If one person is almost assured to win, and you give them a 1 in 6 chance to just win it, and say, hey, play the game for 2 hours or 3 hours or whatever, and then we'll check to see if you just won the game, having almost nothing to do with what you did. And then we'll go to the next year, and we'll do the same thing, although maybe you won't win then. That doesn't add a lot to the competitive nature of the game. And again, I don't think that it's particularly a historically demanded little role, right? It's as if, a wild hair crawled up the designer's ass and he just was locked onto this. I can't imagine the playtesters not coming back and saying, this rule really kind of sucks. Which is probably why he defended it so vigorously. But he did not defend it from a gameplay point of view. The only estimate that I can make, or guesstimate, whatever, guess, the words aren't coming and I'm tired as hell and I can't keep my pipe lit. The only estimate that I can make as to why he might have done this, projection, I don't know. Like I said, the words aren't working right now, is that the game is significantly unbalanced if you make it to 1814, and that you have to give the French these shots in 12 and, a somewhat more even shot in 13 to win the game, to give you game balance. Well, that's not the kind of game balance I want. I don't want game balance to be, I just have a 1 in 6 chance of winning after some period of play. I want it to be significantly affected by what I do, And it doesn't appeal to me at all. And then when you deal out the cards, you have this mulligan rule. This is also from Napoleonic Wars. And I find it such an obnoxious rule, because it's the kind of thing where you really have to understand your deck of cards in order to decide, do I have a good hand or an iffy hand? And then you have the complexity around the home cards and all that. And really, it's just all this chrome shoved onto the CDG system that kind of excited me when I first saw it in Napoleonic Wars. But at this point, I'm not excited enough about CDGs to be willing to accept that. Obviously, the market has spoken on these games. This one's been languishing around in GMT's warehouses since 2005. It's still on the bargain basement list. Deserves to be there, I think. I'm not saying it's a terrible game, because I'm sure there are people who like the system, who want maybe a somewhat shorter game, one that plays in 2 to 4 players a little bit better, and uses that system that they're used to, and the same little tricks that they're used to playing with, I get to play my plus card, I've got resources, all those things. So if you really, really liked Napoleonic Wars and you want more of the same, this is what you'd want to go with. But, and you think that it applies at all to an operational system. But these are clearly poorer cousins to Napoleonic Wars. Napoleonic Wars itself has come under some criticism consistently. I've played it since I did my videos, and I think I said this in the intro. And the game does not hold up to competitive play. Its historical levels get blown away. Now, do they get blown away worse than other games on the Napoleonic Wars? I mean, Empires in Arms, for example, which is Fantasyland in Napoleon world. Yeah, it's probably better than that. I love Empires in Arms. I probably would like Napoleonic Wars again, just because of you can get historical and results out of it if you play historically. The game just doesn't necessarily encourage historical play, and that's the same problem with Empires and Arms. War and Peace, I'm not so sure about. I got my questions. The only grand strategic Napoleonic game that I've seen that works is Age of Napoleon, which is really a light game, but it seems to outshine all the others in terms of accuracy. The only possible exception to that is War and Peace. I have not dissected War and Peace. I used to play it. It's got some serious flaws. The campaign game just is broken. But maybe you can tinker with it and make it work. Anyway, what about this one? I wish I hadn't bought it, to tell you the truth. It'll stay in my possession. I'll play it again if I live long enough to. And my impression from Kutuzov was not that good either. It was kind of like, yeah, I think these I could have certainly passed on. They just don't add enough. They're not at that high level and broad scope that I think works best for the CDGs that have any military nature. Now, I thought 1960 worked fine. Twilight Struggle works okay. It works pretty well. I mean, it's world global. But you start getting too much into the military, and these guys just tend to bog down. The one that worked the best for me was Wilderness War out of the ones that kind of bog down, that go into detail in the military. For a bubble game, okay? For, you've got Empire of the Sun, which uses hexes. And that gets rid of a lot of the problems, You also don't have the same kind of, you don't have the same kind of gunpowder era CDG leaders and numeric markers and everything. It's a different game. It's a very different style. Something I ought to get back to. Along with so many other games. All right, well, we've babbled on and on and on. To no use. This was one that I should not have done, but it had a lot of requests, and it looked like a short enough game that I could actually do it without committing to something stupid.